Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to look at just the first 6 bars of the Adagio in B minor by Mozart, just to see what he's up to in this remarkable piece. Because something that we're often told, it's a slightly oversimplified approach, is that in the classical period composers like to do things in a much simpler way than the complexities of the Baroque had arrived at. And there's some truth in that. But at the same time, there's some really colourful stuff going on as composers like Haydn and Mozart get going. And this is a great example. And just by having a look at what happens in the first 6 bars of this piece, it gives us real insight into the drama of the piece. So if this is a piece you're playing, you might find this helpful, but just if you're trying to appreciate what might go on in the more kind of detailed aspects of the classical style, or thinking about how Mozart achieves such a sense of drama in the opening of this Adagio, hopefully the next few minutes we spend together will reveal how all of that works. So let's have a look. Now, one interesting thing about this piece is it's an Adagio in B minor, and right at the beginning we just have 3 melodic notes. And I don't know about you, but if I were writing a piece in B minor, I think I'd be inclined to put down the tonic chord of B minor at the beginning. So everybody get the idea that that's the tonic chord, we're in the key of B minor. Mozart does that, but he does it in a melodic rather than a harmonic way. So you notice these first 3 notes, B, F sharp, D, are the 3 notes of chord 1 in B minor. B, D, F sharp, just in a different order. So we hear this monophonic start, but the harmony is kind of unveiled as those first 3 notes unfold. So the first thing we hear is this sort of slightly veiled chord 1. Now, if you were writing a piece in B minor, particularly if you were a classical composer aiming for kind of a bit of simplicity in the approach to harmony, what would be the next chord you would write? Well, I might be tempted to write a chord 5, you know. If I started on a chord 1, then I might write a chord 5 and then maybe come back to chord 1. And I'd be quite happy with that. I'd be a very happy classical composer if I could do that. What does Mozart do? Well, he starts with his outlined chord 1 in the melody, and then the first chord we get this. Whoa, what's that doing there? As the first chord of a piece in B minor, that's a dramatic touch, isn't it? So here he is hitting the drama straight away. Now, what is this chord? It's a diminished 7th. So any chord that's a pile of minor thirds, or the equivalent of minor thirds, by which I mean possibly augmented seconds, well, if you see a pile of minor thirds with some augmented seconds maybe, then you know it's a diminished 7th chord. So we've got E sharp in the bass, G sharp, B, D. Yeah, that all fits. So it must be a diminished 7th chord. But you know, what's going on? Why have we got an E sharp in it and a G sharp in it? This is a rather peculiar affair, isn't it? Well, if you've got genuine minor thirds, so E sharp, G sharp, yeah, G sharp, B, B, D, they're all genuine minor thirds. Well, that tells you that this is the diminished 7th in its root position. And when it's in its root position, we expect it to be built on chord 7. So let's see what we've got. We've got E sharp, G sharp and B. D is added, that's making it the diminished 7th, but the basic chord E sharp, G sharp, B should be chord 7. Well, hang on a minute, that's not chord 7 in B minor, that's chord 7 in the key of F sharp. Whether it's F sharp major or F sharp minor, we're yet to find out. So here he is, writing a piece of music in B minor. The first thing he does is sort of state chord 1 in B minor without being terribly clear about it because it's just 3 notes of a melody. The first chord we actually hear is a diminished seventh, not the first chord you'd think of writing in any piece really. Secondly, it's a diminished seventh in the wrong key. Oh my goodness, has Mozart lost the plot, we begin to ask? Well, no, there's a real sort of rhyme and reason as to what's going on here. But we've got this diminished seventh in the key of F sharp. Now, has he modulated to the key of F sharp already before he's really established B minor? Well, not really. I want to take you forwards to the second beat of bar 2. When you come to the second beat of bar 2, you notice we've got this chord, F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, A sharp. Well, that is chord 5 in the key of B minor. So that's kind of what we might expect to happen, you know, a dominant chord in the home key of B minor. But it's also a tonic chord in F sharp major, isn't it? Aha. Now this diminished seventh we're talking about in bar 1 is a diminished seventh in the key of F sharp. And as I say, it could be F sharp major, it could be F sharp minor. But if we think of it in F sharp major, do you see what's going on? He's using the diminished seventh in the key of F sharp major, not because he's really trying to modulate to F sharp major, but because the chord of F sharp major is the dominant chord, it's called 5, in B minor. So he's using the diminished seventh of the key of the dominant chord. Clever stuff, isn't it, really? So we've got our B minor outlined in the first 3 notes. Then we've got this diminished seventh in the key of F sharp. Then, okay, what's he doing? Well, you could say these are passing notes, although it's quite interesting that it turns this into a chord 5B in F sharp. Then he moves on to these 2 notes, which reinstate the diminished seventh again. And then he does something that's very standard, which is 1C to 5. So it's a 6-4-5-3 progression. It's going chord 1 in second inversion, 1C, onto chord 5. So you see how that diminished seventh in F sharp relates to that dominant chord in B minor. Very clever stuff. Okay, bar 2 then. We've gone 1 second inversion to chord 5. On we go. And when we get to this bit, the second half of beat 2, there's another diminished seventh. So there's the second diminished seventh, and we're only nearly at the halfway point in bar 2. This time it's a diminished seventh in the key of B minor. How do I know that? Well, E, G is a minor third, but G, A sharp is an augmented second. A sharp to C sharp is a minor third. So in order to get that back into its root position, I need all these intervals to be genuine minor thirds. So if I put that same chord into root position, it's this: A sharp, C sharp, E, G. Do you see why that's now root position? Because A sharp to C sharp's a minor third, C sharp to E is a minor third, E to G is a minor third, and I haven't got any augmented seconds. So basically, those are the notes: A sharp, C sharp, E, and G, where I've got genuine minor thirds. A sharp, C sharp, E is chord 7 in B minor, isn't it? So those notes, A sharp, C sharp, E, G, give us the diminished seventh in the key of B minor, and here we find it used as an inversion of that. So that's what's going on there. Okay, now the second half of bar 2, not so complicated. Essentially it's this. What you've got written is this. But can you hear that's a series of appoggiaturas? So basically we've got 1B, 5B, 1. Well, that's a perfectly standard kind of progression, isn't it? But Mozart's just enriched it by having these appoggiaturas. So it's good to know what those things are, particularly if you're playing it, because what's an appoggiatura? An appoggiatura is a leaning note. So we lean on the appoggiatura, maybe step back onto the next note. So can you hear the impact of the first 2 bars if I just play that in the light of the explanation we've explored? So here's your 1 in B minor. Here's your diminished seventh in the key of F sharp, either going to 5B in F sharp or passing notes. Back to the diminished seventh, 1 second inversion, chord 5, diminished seventh in B minor in a different inversion, then appoggiaturas 1B, 5B, 1. And there's your first statement, the first two bars. An amazing amount going on in just the first two bars. There's no sense of let's have a little introduction and warm up before we do something fancy. He's straight in there, isn't he? Okay, what happens in bar 2? Well, we've got this dramatic forte. Okay, well, the chords there are not too difficult to work out. Here's a chord 1 in B minor in its first inversion, a 1B chord, and then it's all slipping down there to a chord 7B. But just notice the right hand B is sustained, so it becomes a suspension. It's prepared here, it's sounded here, and it resolves there. So a suspension, prepare, sound, resolve, PSR. P and S need to be the same note as each other, which they are. S to R resolves by step, normally downwards. That's what happens here. P belongs to its prevailing chord, which it does, and R belongs to its prevailing chord, which it does. But in between, you get the dissonance because S has to be dissonant. So this is part of the chord. It's dissonant here, then it resolves. So that's a lovely expressive use of a 7/6 suspension. Then it carries on. Having had 1B, 7B, we then go on to 6B. That's what's going on here. And then at the end of the bar, well, he's going to end up on 5B. So do you see it's just kind of coming down these first inversion chords. But at the end of the bar, just decorates it a little bit. So you could say this is an appoggiatura onto the 5B, or you could say it's a suspension going 7/6. Of course, that's elaborated a bit further because he has this A natural as well, which is rather nice because A natural with the A sharp in the bass, that's a bit cheeky, isn't it? A bit dissonant. But this could be a diminished seventh being implied again as well, because really A sharp, C sharp, G, we're just missing E. So there's an implication of another diminished seventh. But you see the trick in bar 3 is just first inversion, first inversion, first inversion, first inversion. 1B, 7B, 6B, 5B. With those suspensions or the other ways of seeing those moves, if you like. Okay, he goes on onto the 4th bar now, and we're still kind of climbing down. So now we've got G major in first inversion, and then it's doing the same trick again. It's another suspension because this is sequential with the previous bar. If you look at bar 3, then you look at bar 4, you notice bar 4 is the same kind of thing as bar 3, but it's just slipped down a third, so it's sequence. So first inversion and another 7/6 suspension. But now we're beginning to wonder what's happened to the key. We've got A natural in the bass, could be part of a descending melodic minor scale, or it could be that maybe we're going to D major, the relative major, in which case that will be a 4B chord, going to a 3B chord, going to a 2B chord. So, you know, when you hear that, you start thinking, yeah, this is going to D major. Does Mozart take you to D major? Does he? Heck! What happens here is we get to this E minor chord on the 3rd beat of the 3rd bar, and then he says, well, I know that's chord 2 in D major, but hey, why don't we call it chord 1 in E minor? Just for a laugh, why not? Okay, well, what he then does, at the end of bar 4, you get this. Okay, so another suspension going on really in the top part, because if you look at the outer parts, that's prepared, sounded, resolved, isn't it? And it's another one of these 7/6s, and it's got a decoration because you've got that going as well. And when you get to the last quaver, the last half of the last beat, well, that again is implying a diminished seventh, but this time a diminished seventh in E minor. So what's going on? Is that really a diminished seventh, or in the tenor, is that an upper auxiliary from the B coming back? There are lots of different ways you could look at this, and this chord maybe suggests something else as well, really. So you could be thinking, well, that's a 2-7 in E minor. I think that's the best way of looking at it. Passing note, and then onto a harmony note, making a diminished seventh maybe. Coming back to the B, but that's a kind of chord 5 second inversion in E minor. Anyway, lots of different ways you can look at the end of that bar, but you can see that whatever it is, we're talking E minor. What are we doing in E minor? It's the subdominant minor from the original key. Okay, it's not miles away, is it? We go into bar 5 on a chord of E minor, first inversion, tonic chord. Passing notes coming down there, and then we're repeating this thing that we had at the end of the previous bar, and then we're repeating the first bit of the bar we're in, but this time melodically he goes up. Do you notice this? First time it comes down, and then this time it goes up. So he can kind of do something sequential. So we have this E minor thing, exactly as it was before, starts again, you think it's going to repeat, but this time it goes up. And he uses that to do this. So do you see how that's sequential with what was happening 2 beats earlier? But this, doing the same thing again, but now in the key of F sharp. Well, we've been here before, haven't we? Using that diminished seventh in F sharp in bar 1. Well, here we are thinking in F sharp again. You see the E sharps around, and that's looking like a kind of something to do with chord 5 in F sharp major, isn't it? Well, the next chord, beginning of bar 6, is F sharp major, first inversion. Are we in F sharp major? Well, sort of for a brief moment, but we're not staying in F sharp major. We've had that brief skirmish with it, but F sharp major, of course, in first inversion as it is here, is also chord 5 in first inversion in the key of B minor. So it's 5 in B minor again. So playing around with the dominant chord, but using chords that belong to the key of the dominant chord. You see how he's done that again. But now, diminished seventh in B minor again. So you see the vast use of the diminished seventh. And then, having done that, he suspends the right-hand notes over this tonic chord. That's rather lovely, isn't it? Because it gives you a kind of 4-3 on the top and a 9-8 in the second part down onto the B minor chord, or so we think. But there's another little twist in the tail, because you get that as it resolves, he moves the tenor part down to E sharp. So we get E sharp again, which is another little suggestion of F sharp, isn't it? Do you see what he's doing again? And then what does he do? 1 in second inversion, coming down the scale to just these 2 notes, A sharp and C sharp. That clearly imply chord 5 in the original key of B minor. So to see what's so remarkable about these first 6 bars, we're in the key of B minor, but we've got all these excursions suggesting F sharp major, even though it's not really F sharp major, it's just suggesting the dominant chord of B minor. How we get touches of E minor, how we think maybe we're going into D major in bar 4, but in fact we never really go to D major at all. And it's all adding to the drama and the intrigue, packed then with ornamentation, like the use of the suspensions, the appoggiaturas and so on. There's still something very delicate, the Mozartian style still comes through, but it's packed with drama. And this is why it's important to know about it, because if you're going to play this piece, it's very easy just to sort of play the notes and make it sound like a sort of dinky piece of Mozart. But actually, if you tune in to all that's going on there, you know exactly what to draw out in a performance. Or if you're just trying to sharpen your analysis skills, hopefully you can see that just looking at the first 6 bars of that helps us to see what's going on, what's the purpose of what's happening in the harmonic design and how that's supported in the melodic design of it as well. So there we are. We could do the whole piece and it would take a very long time to really unpack it. But what I really wanted to do here was just take the first 6 bars and share with you how much is going on in just that opening statement of this piece. And I hope that inspires you to get to know this piece or to play it with even greater insight and to continue that thinking forwards into the rest of the piece if that's what you want to do. But it all reveals the absolute genius of Mozart, doesn't it? So I hope that's been useful to you. We've got loads of other videos out there looking at other pieces of music, and if you go to the website, we've got detailed analysis courses there as well. So if this is the kind of analysis you really want to get stuck into, you can find a course that's analysing the whole of Beethoven's Pathetique piano sonata, another one that's doing one of the Bach preludes and fugues from the 48 that might also help you with that. And we also undertake quite a bit of this kind of analytical thinking in our Music Maestros program. So if that's something that's of interest to you, go to the Music Matters website and click on the Maestros information, and you could come and join us for a monthly live stream when we're looking at music in this kind of detail. Anyway, hope that's been useful and that enhances your appreciation of this absolutely amazing composer, Mozart.